Welcome back to Partnerships Unraveled, the podcast where we dive deep into the mysteries and the secrets of partnerships on the channel. My name is Michel. I'm head of marketing at Chanext, and I'll be your host for today. Now, today I'm sitting down with Michael Roch, founder and partnerships advisor at MHPR Advisors. It's great to see you, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to this one. To start off, simple question. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and a little bit about MHPR?
Sure, be happy to. So the short version of a long story is that for the last 25 years, I've helped senior leaders in relation to partnerships, alliances, ecosystems worldwide. The biggest topics are around gain sharing, around governance, around strategy. Founded my first business in 2006, invested in a couple of more startups since then. And as you've mentioned, I founded MHPR Advisors as the partnerships advisory. We're now about 10 years old, and we advise on partnerships and everything else around that. We do serve clients across the globe, across mainly professional services, life sciences, tech sector. Those are the three big verticals. And delighted to have this conversation with you around channel and ecosystem.
Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to this one as well. So taking a look at your background, hearing what you're saying now, you've worked across joint ventures, strategic alliances, professional services, tech channel partnerships. We tend to talk a lot about the human aspect of partnerships in this podcast, and I'm sure we'll touch on that as well. But while so many partnerships primarily rely on human-to-human relationship building, I want to start off with looking at an area where technology might matter at least equally as much as the human side, which is tech alliances. Tech alliances are generally long-term, complicated engagements with a bunch of moving parts. So based on your broad experience, where do you see the tech channel making mistakes when it comes to building a future-proof tech ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fundamentally, I think that tech partnerships, tech channel ecosystems don't get a lot of things wrong. So for a lot of other sectors, how the technology sector has built partnerships to go to market, to develop solutions, has really been leading and has been an example for other sectors. So I want to just get that out of the way first, right? So when you're in the technology channel ecosystem space, a lot of it is leading for other sectors. Then when we're looking at mistakes, you can always sort of, pick the places where things could be improved. So a couple of big mistakes, I think, are that you're looking to run one partner program for everybody, right? One size fits all. Why is that the problem? Because in today's channel, it includes MSPs, service firms, software partners, marketplaces, industry specialists. They're somewhat different. They don't all need the same support. They don't all need the same rules. The incentives work somewhat differently. So having one partner program for everyone is one topic. The second one that I know we'll talk about more is, the world, in particular the tech world, has become super short term. So the focus in terms of how a lot of tech ecosystems reward their partners is very short term, right? Short term sales, rather than long term customer value. And that translates to many programs still pay for mostly the initial deal, even though growth really, or profitable growth really, depends more on adoption and renewals and expansion of services. So becoming less super transactional would be one place. And then the third one is a lot of partners, I think, perceive the partner experience to be just too hard. Right. So that starts with approvals being complicated, training difficult, rebates, systems too complicated, changing teams constantly, right? Turnover in the partnership space is a huge issue when you're constantly changing the terms of the partnership. When you're making the partner experience too hard, then I think that's one thing that does not need to be the way it is. So those are three things that I offer. What's key, I think, for most partners is the consistency by which you show up. Mm-hmm. And I go back to people turnover, right? I mean, the turnover that we're seeing in the alliance managers and the folks who are making the ecosystems work. In the end, a lot of it does happen person to person, at least in terms of solving big problems. How do you solve those? You don't solve those through terms. You solve those through, people getting together to figure stuff out. And when you have a lot of turnover in your system, you've got lots, you have no institutional knowledge because it's always new people, and that will undermine the quality of your partner program. There's a couple of them that one can talk about improving.
Yeah, no, I really like how you're marrying the idea of those person-to-person relationships also in tech being incredibly, incredibly important. And I agree, right? It's really hard to hone in on a very complicated technical alliance if your personal relationship on that side jumps ship, right? It almost feels like you have to build again. And I'd love to add one mistake I see and one good thing I'd see to your already comprehensive list. The mistake I see is that some companies over leverage like a single tech partnership. So they'll build a very strong alliance with like one or two companies, and they'll miss out on a rapidly changing market and many opportunities, basically putting their eggs in one basket. Do you see that happen as well, or am I saying something stupid?
No, I don't think it's stupid at all. I look at that as a portfolio. If you look at your personal finances, you've got a big base of basically blue chip assets that you're holding, and then you have a couple that you're holding for future potential, right? So how you look at, I mean, in a very, I mean, for the massive ecosystems that doesn't quite hold up, but for the for the sort of ordinary tech, tiers of partnerships, we'll come to that, I'm sure. You want to, of course, build a couple of really deep relationships that you can leverage, that you can rely on for further growth, for more services, etc. But yeah, at the same time, you want to keep a couple of more emerging ones in the mix to see what happens.
Yeah, I every single time I talk to someone who has a lot of experience here, I get the best kind of analogies or metaphors in this space. I've had relationships with them, which I'm sure we'll touch on, like human relationships, but now also your banking portfolio makes so much sense. As I mentioned, I wanted to say one good thing that these that tech alliances bring, and that's that there seems to be pretty strong due diligence up front because they understand the impact of a good tech alliance. So when they're having these conversations about how to build their ecosystem, I often see that there is more effort up front to ensure that everything is aligned to get going. And I think other partnerships, even though sometimes you just have to hit the ground running or jump in the deep end, it would help to kind of think of the bigger picture and the long term value before you kind of just jump in and see what happens. I think tech alliances do that well.
Yeah, so let me add two things to what you've just said. So really depending where you come from. If you come to partnerships from the M&A space, then the partnership is about doing a deal, doing good due diligence, doing a deal, and then it just sort of manages itself, right? But that's not how it works, right? The deal is the starting point, right? And then you're looking to create a deal that's flexible enough so that it can last 5, 10, 15, in the life science context, 30 years, right? But often the folks who come from the transactional side will um, either even poo-poo or will just completely underestimate how much energy needs to be put in on the once the deal is done. That's where 90% of the energy happens in long-term relationships, right? I think that's important because I see a lot of people who come to partnerships from the transactional space who either refuse to or don't want to understand that.
Well, I think that segues nicely into another topic I would like to hit on, and that is how, after the deal is done, do you then make sure that it continues to be good? And when we were doing the prep call, there was something interesting you mentioned, and that's the need for structured kind of resets or health checks in partnerships.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, I hear a bunch of analogies come by in this podcast, and one of them is the parallel between partnerships and our relationships with our wives, husbands, girlfriends, boyfriends, family, whatever. And obviously the relationships we have with our work partners. And I think a health check is quite similar there, right? Asking how your significant other is feeling is something that everybody should do regularly. So let's apply this to business. What does a real partnership health check look like in practice? And how often should enterprise partner leaders be pushing for that conversation?
Yeah, that's a really great topic. First, I want to probably distinguish between a structured reset and a health check. So your structured reset is something that where you literally, partnership is quite mature. You reevaluate the partnership objectives, are trying to figure out where the voids, what objectives do we need to re-agree, everything around the arrangement that you have with your partner. Now, most larger firms only bother doing that with their biggest tier 1, tier 2 partners once in a while. But that's a structured reset that you do when you know that something is amiss. Your ongoing health check, and that's already in the adjective already given it, right? The health check is something much less onerous, and it covers a couple of principal questions that you conduct on a more frequent basis. That should take no more than a week or two end to end. And the question is, how often do you do it? It depends, right? If you see that there's an issue coming up, or when you have a alliance counterpart change, a senior executive change on either side, you might want to do one of those. Otherwise, 12, 18 months, something like that is a good cadence if you don't have an event-driven reason to do it.
Mhm.
And essentially, The questions that you're asking is really simple. 5 questions. Are we still aligned in terms of outcomes we want? Is the business working? Is the partnership reducing the pipeline, revenue, margin, influence, customer value, whatever that you've sought to achieve? Is the day-to-day model working? Meaning, how we're planning, how we're communicating, how we're handling leads, how we're handling approvals. Is that running smoothly? 4th, how is trust? Do both sides feel respected, treated fairly? Is my partnership worth prioritizing over other partners, over other customers, over other key customers? And then, 5th, what needs to change? Are there specific fixes, changes, improvements that we could that would change, that would really improve how the results in the next 60 to 90 days? So that's a much less intrusive thing. That's health check. Very simple process. Gather the facts, speak to a couple of people on your side, perhaps with the alliance manager on their side, maybe around the simplest, very simple scorecard, right? To across maybe, well, in a more formal partnership, you will have the success dimensions agreed as part of your governance arrangements. But if you don't, very simple scorecard that you can agree on, and then agree actions. It doesn't have to be onerous. Some firms create very complicated scorecard. I've never thought that was a good idea. For the structured reset, you almost always will have a consultant involved. For the health checks, you'll want someone to help to set up a process. But most health checks, the alliance managers should be able to run that themselves, on an ongoing basis for their various partnerships. Does that answer the question, or just start to answer the question around health checks?
Comprehensively, yeah, and I think it raises a good point where no, it's not intrusive, but it is important. I think that there is an ease, especially with alliance managers that have very, very many partners that they have to work with, to kind of let things go as long as nothing's breaking, because obviously they can't focus on everyone at once. But being able to identify green flags, red flags, whatever is going on, being able to identify those structurally every year, every 6 months with your partners is so incredibly important, because it allows you far more room to build, but also remove your attention from the partners that you now find out aren't going to work.
That's it.
So yeah, I think it's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry for interrupting you. I mean, something that you said just triggered another thought. You're right. Many alliance managers are running many partners. I'm not talking about a PowerPoint marathon here, huh? So
Exactly.
the person, the meeting around that health check, 90 minutes. Ideally, not half a day, not a full day. Structured reset, of course, a different story. That's a project on its own, right? For the firm. But health check, get a routine. The better the routine is, the easier they are.
Yeah, and to kind of take the edge off, it is mutual. And I think alliance and partners managers can communicate that very clearly. Like, this is not just for us to say, hey, are you doing well? It's also for you to say, are we doing well?
Yeah.
And that creates more transparency and alignment inherently, right?
And here, very important, very good thoughts. I don't think it always needs to be the much larger partner who sets the tone on this, right? If you're a smaller partner in an ecosystem that has a couple of 1 or 2 or 3 big, large companies that you're partnering with, you also have a right to help set the tone on that. That too ought to be a collaborative effort. I know the power dynamics sometimes just don't warrant that, but you as a smaller ecosystem partner have a right to say, look, we've got an approach to how we do health checks. How do you all do this? And here I want to give a shout out to Jen Twombly of the Rhythm of Business. Her vital signs approach to this kind of thing is really top of the world on this.
Amazing. Yeah, maybe if you share a link with me to that, I can also put it into this recording to share with our listeners. No, that would be great. And yeah, I completely agree, because the more and more I talk to companies that have, for example, large SMB partner networks, the more you hear that they're valuing those more. Because even though they seem small, it's a numbers game, right? And incremental revenue is easier to drive then if you have a smart approach for these SMB partners and make it feel personalized, but that also includes listening and being transparent. So I think, yeah, don't only focus on those big partners, have these health checks with as many companies as you can, and see it as an opportunity to really drive more success in the future, not less.
Yeah. And to call the partnerships that are not working, right? I mean, that's the other, there is a renewal process that happens in an ecosystem, and it's okay that especially when you're running a large number of partners, that a number will atrophy. It's just how
Yeah.
it has.
Yeah, and that's why these health checks are important, because you can't see trends if you're not measuring anything, right? So if you're not having these conversations, you can't see what's going wrong either. Speaking of trends, I regularly hear that the partner model is shifting a bit, and that's that the goal shouldn't always be to be transactional, to maximize value extraction from day one. Why is that a dangerous instinct, and how do you prevent that kind of from sneaking in when you're building a more long-term relationship? Because obviously value still matters to every for-profit company.
Yeah. So, well, not just value matters, but also the short-term results, right? Get so much, so much emphasis. So here's the thing: when you're going back to basics, I'm not sure that the partnership model ever has lent itself to a short-term gain and get out kind of situation. There's a couple of different angles to this, right? In the end, a partnership is two or more organizations coming together to develop something from which they both profit. That's the fundamentals of a partnership. So by definition, that takes time to gestate. Now, in the tech space, because of just how software works, co-development is very short, right? You don't spend a lot of time to have to develop a solution, right? Either you have a plug or something that where you can get to a joint solution very quickly. Enter life sciences, which I know quite well. It's a very different story, right? You take years to develop the drug, and then you can manufacture, then you can market it, right? So the partly the short-termism is built into just how quickly we can develop a solution. The word partnership has seen a massive amount of inflation, just almost like title inflation in the corporate hierarchies, right?
Yeah.
Everybody who's selling me $1 worth of kit is all of a sudden a partner. Well, no, you're not. You're a supplier or your vendor. A partner is somebody with whom, by definition, I'm taking some effort to get to know them, to understand what they can offer to my clientele, what I can offer to you and your clientele, and then we build a proposition together, take that to market, sell it, and then we both have something. That's how a partnership ought to work. But I think it's just the inherent features of the tech sector that have really shortened the span of how quickly we can develop a partnership. If you want to have a meaningful program, then you do want to invest some time in developing that joint proposition and investing in the systems and processes to make sure that you are on track for delivering whatever your objectives are on sales, on leads, on whichever. So it's okay that happens quickly, that happens efficiently. Almost always a question of resource. We can talk about AI in a moment if you wish, but a partnership is by definition not transactional. So that's if we're reducing the number of partners we have in order to rethink how we're looking at our partnerships and making sure that they drive value long term, then I'll be all for that.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting parallel here, and it's kind of ironic that I've not heard it yet in these conversations. I'm sure it's out there, but if you take this same kind of short-term value approach, the hands-off approach to partnerships, if you take that same approach with your own in-house sales team, things are going to go very wrong very quickly. Like, I can't imagine starting my first day on the job as an account executive and that people say, okay, have fun. And I'm like, wait, well, what does the product do? And they're like, no, you figure it out. Like, what's my commission plan? Oh yeah, you can find that somewhere. Where are my customers? Oh, you figure it out, right? You're the sales guy. Like, if we would do that, everybody would laugh in your face, because that wouldn't work. But at the end of the day, partners, if you look at resellers, whatever, even large scale enterprise partners, they are an extension of your sales org, right? So why would we see it any differently than how we approach and embrace our direct sales arm?
Yeah, I think, well, that's right. But I think most firms have figured out that there has to be some degree of investment, early stage investment in the partner. They have to understand our solution. We have to understand what they can offer. We have to at least somehow get to a minimal set of shared information, shared data that we can both look at to see whether things are successful. I think that, again, if that can be done efficiently, super. But I think most firms have clocked that is a ticket to entry. You can't just say, congratulations, you're not a partner. Go with God, do what you think you can do. That will not work in any partnership, right? We have to invest in the partner's success, because that means our success. And that's true across the sectors. How much that happens day to day, different question. But I think most firms have understood that they've got to do something. Well, firms do that. There's a big span in terms of how well firms do that. But I think most have clocked that they've got to do something.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I also agree that there's variation, there's a bandwidth in how much effort companies put into this. I mean, for example, I recently spoke to AvePoint, and they have their channel evangelism director whose goal it is to make partners feel like they're part of something that's special and impactful, right? And I think that's so incredibly important. So yeah, I agree that companies shouldn't oversimplify, especially the start of building a relationship like this. But I think that sometimes they also overcomplicate it. So what I'm curious about, when you look at enterprise ecosystem, right, what do you feel the differences between something like sophistication and unnecessary complexity?
Yeah. Um, well, that's a good question. I think I might have mentioned at the outset that you need to have, at any size, you can't just have one partner program and have that be everything for everybody, because different partners have different needs. So the answer is it's a balancing act. If I can make it super complicated, right? I've got my MSPs, I've got my service firms, my software partners, and all of them I've got 5 tiers. Wow. So I've got, 3 types of partnerships and I've got 5 tiers. I've got 15 types of partners I have to manage. I'm already exhausted even trying to explain that, right? Most firms will not need that. What I do think is helpful always is to introduce tiers relatively quickly. That you say, look, here's the why. We have 3 tiers, and here is what we're willing to invest and the ROI we need from our tier 1 partners. Here is what we're willing to invest in our tier 2 partners. And here is what we're willing to invest in our tier 3 / everyone else. And this is the ROI we expect from that invest. It helps you manage your ROI, I think well. Do you need to replicate that across all of the different types of partners? No. So instead of creating your perfect grid, I think it's worth to be pragmatic here, depending on your business model, what you want your partners for. And yes, it's not always the same. That's where you then shape, how do we decline the different needs of our partners in relation to our ecosystem. The scale really does matter here, right? If you're a small firm, you will start with one partner. You always do that. It always starts with one, right? But when you're looking at a Microsoft, I've lost track of how many partner programs they run for the various things, right? So the scale of the organization, the scale of the ecosystem does matter. The glib answer that I should have started with, responding to your question, is as few as necessary, but as many as needed, huh? Just keep it as small as possible if you're going to start working about typologies or worrying about typologies of your partners. The larger your ecosystem gets, and the more complicated your typology becomes, the more you need to invest in your alliance managers, in your ecosystem managers. So the more competent they need to be, the more you need to invest in alliance management technology to make sure that you can tie things in a proper way. But don't underestimate that investment on the resourcing of the ecosystem. The more complicated it gets, the more infrastructure that needs in order to run well and not to compete with your in-house operations.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I feel it also helps organizations to look at what their best performing partnerships are and why those are performing well, and seeing if you can work backwards and implement a model based on those types of partnerships, right? To simplify and streamline is so incredibly important, but you don't want to lose the value that tiering or a point system brings simply
Yeah.
from a kind of value driving perspective.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that informs then also what skills you need in your alliance managers. There, a lot of alliance managers come from, well, they almost always come from a different discipline, right? I mean, the fewest people will have grown up in alliances from university days. Why? Simply because it requires experience in order to add value in an ecosystem, right? So
Yeah.
that tends to not be a junior role. But also at the same time, it's very often these folks tend to not really have a good sense, or are not given a very good sense of what's next for them, right? How is that a useful step in a career? Keep in mind your alliance managers are your partners' advocates inside your firm, and vice versa, huh? So
Yeah.
I'm always a big fan in investing in the human resource to help manage that, and that becomes more important the more complex your ecosystem gets.
Yeah, and I think that also ties into, hey, how the industry is changing right now, because indeed that experience is critical because the human relationship aspect of partnerships is critical. But on the other hand, building out the tech around it and the admin processes is becoming easier and easier. So I think it's an easier transition now than ever for people from different fields to stream into alliance management or channel.
I I agree with that completely. As long as they and their leadership allow themselves to shed the bad bits about what they've learned along the way.
Yeah.
For example, a lot of folks come into ecosystems from sales. Okay, sales is a great profession. Love sales, no problem with sales. Running an ecosystem or running a group of partners is more than running sales. I can borrow a lot of skills, right? Getting to know my internals or my counterparty's internal stakeholders. I've got to do that as a salesperson. But but it is a different job. And the same as if I come from finance or if I come from HR or from the science in the life science space. I've got to have an open mind about what it requires to manage a partnership that goes beyond the discipline from where I came. That's really important.
I fully agree. And I think there again, having those conversations and engagements helps so much. And look, I've had an interesting career so far, which I'm very proud of, but I never have too much pride to say, hey, the way I'm approaching things is that way the right way to approach things here. Just having that, if you're a new alliance manager, coming in and speaking with your partners and saying, these are the assumptions I have about how we're going to build our business. Does that align with what you want, what we need? What can I change? Where can I say, no, I think my approach is better, right? So just have that conversation, leave your ego at the door, not your knowledge, not your experience, but your assumptions. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Your assumptions. And well, many firms have a alliance playbook, alliance management playbook. So, okay, first thing, you come into to the job, of course, you read that, but then after sort of 6 to 9 months, it helps to also sit back and question what's in there. Because once you've been running partnerships inside the firm for 15 years, you're not going to have the fresh mind to be able to say, okay, we're going to adjust this, that, and the other thing. But 6 months in, 9 months in, I think that's a different question. You then have some experience, you see what's working, what's not working. You still come with that fresh approach to then say, okay, hey, look, in section X of our alliance management playbook, this does not make any sense. Not the partners hate it. I don't think it's very efficient. Can we change it? I'd encourage new AMs to take the courage and to do that. Of course, that assumes somewhat empowering organizational culture, which is not always a given.
But to be fair, I think they could frame it in the context of an internal health check. If you want to do it with partners, you sometimes got to do it with the way you're working yourself as well, because it kind of all ties together.
For sure. And here we go back to where we started our discussion with, I'm always not surprised. Disappointed, is that the better word? Disappointed with the pressures that even very, very senior execs, C-suite level execs put themselves under in terms of short-termism.
Mm-hmm.
My CBO, yes, my chief business officer has short-term results to deliver. I get that. But if you've got a C in front of your title, that also means that a substantial part of your time you ought to be spending on long term. That I see happening in some organizations, in many I don't, and that's somewhat, to me, that's disappointing.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think also, honestly, it's good to remember that we're still all people and that the pace of change these days could also have an impact on how long-term strategy is perceived, how it's built, right? I mean, does a rolling 3-year strategic forecast make sense if tech is going to change tomorrow? I feel it does, by the way, because you can create a strategy that has tactical flexibility but still kind of forward thinking rigidity. But yeah, I think it's a scary time to be thinking really long term. I don't know what your thoughts are about that or if I'm just naive, but that's my read on the situation.
No, you're not naive. I think you do need to have an operational plan. If that takes you 3 years out, it takes you 3 years out, fine. That operational plan is going to be based on a set of assumptions that you settle on today. So my assumption today, I set out my 3-year plan. But I've used intentionally, that's an operational plan. 3-year projections is an operational plan. 3 years is operational medium term in my world.
Yeah.
Where I agree with you is that, I mean, I've never been a big fan of sort of a 3-year strategic planning cycle. There is, why is it 3 years? Why is it not 3 years and 1 month? Why not
Yeah,
2 years? Why not four?
it's
So
arbitrary. Yeah.
it's arbitrary, right? So the 3 years, it's I know where it came from, the finance world, but really strategy is about understanding where you want to get to, looking at your core competitive challenges that you have to solve, and how your assumptions play into that. So if I've addressed my core competitive challenges, or if my assumptions change in 6 months' time, I don't care what my 3-year operational financial planning cycle is. I have to look at my strategy, right? Well, I'm a big fan in event-driven strategy, rather than, meaning, if we have achieved X, then we look at our strategy, rather than, our strategy, if it's now 2026, our strategy to 2029, that sounds ugly. Our strategy to 2030, we're going to do this, huh? Um, that's the better way to do strategy. And there is a whole bunch of people at McKinsey and a whole bunch of authors who will support my view on that.
Yeah, no, I agree as well, because I think if you lay the foundations for change as an organization, so if you allow people to understand that change can happen and how to deal with that, then indeed it doesn't matter if there's a seismic shift in the industry, and you need to pivot, and people are all used to, hey, I do everything the same for our 5-year rolling forecast or whatever, that's going to lead to issues. But if everybody knows, hey, I need to have this tactical flexibility, right? I need to be able to move in a different direction, and I'm set up for success in that way. That can actually lead to manageable change as opposed to like becoming Nokia, right?
What you're articulating now, though, is a very mature organization.
Yeah, 100%.
A lot of organizations, culturally mature. A lot of organizations, where does strategy happen? Again, it happens with people with a C-suite in front of the title, or it happens in my corporate strategy planning office. Right? And then it gets rolled out to the rest of the organization, back to your alliance managers, because it's an externally facing role in the end. Well, I'm simplifying things. Because such a large bit of your role is externally facing, because a lot of the alliance managers do a lot of internal stuff to get stuff out of the way for the partner. They see stuff probably, possibly, before your C-suite does, right? So involve parts of your organization that doesn't have the title in front of the name in your strategic outlook, in your strategic planning process. You will probably get to a more nimble and a more sustainable way to operate. I can count on I can count on a lot of hands the firms that say they do that, but I can count only on one hand probably the firms that actually practice what they preach in that regard.
Yeah.
Strategy is not just for senior management. Of course, the primary responsibility is with senior management. Sure, that's why you see management, fine. But it's not just there. Especially the partner folks, use them to help build the future of your business. You might learn something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the strategy should be lived and carried by everyone in your organization. It's very similar to culture, right? If culture is a top-down mandate, culture doesn't really exist. If culture is something that people live and breathe, and that turns into a framework, then that's a very different story. And I think the same way we can look at strategy, especially in a changing world, like just listen sometimes. It
Well,
works.
here actually, I wanna just jump into a different sector for a moment. The firms who do that pretty well are traditional professional services partnerships, which is a lot of
Cool.
firms that I see. I'd imagine you've got 1,000 partners, 10,000 partners coming to work every day. You try to develop a strategy in your little ivory tower and saying, "Oh, we're going to roll out the strategy to our 1,000 or 10,000 co-owners." You can't do that, right? Partners will embrace what they co-create and will reject what is being done to them. And if we think that in the corporate world it's any different, it's wise to once in a while involve the crew in your future. I know the
Yeah.
fewest do that, and it's so hard when you're publicly held, and you've got all kinds of analyst pressure, investment pressures with that. But there's a reason why you've got the amount of turnover that you have in businesses. It's in part it is because the folks are completely disengaged. They don't see the firm's future as their future. That's a fundamental leadership problem. You know, I don't think enough's being done about that, and or maybe it's not enough caring is being done about that. I should probably say.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And to be fair, I do know some PE firms that do more closely embody that perspective where they acquire things because they see a long-term perspective, not a long-term investment horizon, but a long-term perspective in how these companies can grow and what they can achieve. And I think that that actually proves quite successful in the longer term as opposed to just like quick valuation, pump and dump kind of stuff, right? I think it has a lot of value.
I think PE has come a long ways in that respect. We've just done a white paper on private equity and professional services, and the alignment with respect to long-term orientation that many PE firms in the sector have are pressing has been quite good. I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's
We're
awesome.
now, but we're now a mile away from tech ecosystems, though.
Oh, who cares? We're talking about interesting stuff. I find it interesting. You find it interesting. And at the end of the day, I just hope that our audience finds it interesting. But I've had a lot of fun. Hey, before we wrap this up, I want to ask two things. First of all, just looking forward, what do you think is going to change the most in, let's say, the next year to 3 years in the ecosystem space?
I think you've won in the ecosystem space, excuse me, if you've built many, many, many partners. Adding lots of partners, the assumption is, oh, that creates growth, right? I think one picture that I see is that it's more about quality than quantity. And I don't think we have the resources to manage all these partners in the most optimal way. Number one. Number two, we now have a tool to really help us drive value, and that's AI. So when it comes to now mainly sales coverage, hey, this partner can help me sell that, etc. Can we get to something more intelligent that we say, look, we can achieve the same thing, if not more, but with 1/3 or 1/2 of the number of partners? Here, I mean, I fully agree with Jay McBain, who's recently written about this. It's this coordinated network approach, AI assisted decision making around which partner can really help us move the needle, where are we most aligned, really getting away from ecosystem being a volume operation to being an operation of quality. That is the one big thing that I think is up on the horizon, as you would expect a function that becomes mature finally.
Yeah. No, I love that perspective. And I think what's great to see is the conversation I have with people like you is they have different perspectives, but it's either from volume to value or it's value in volume. And all of these approaches with different playbooks can lead to effective results specific to an industry, specific to a market. So yeah, I really appreciate that perspective.
I agree with that. If you can make it work, right? If you can make value with volume, if you can make that work. But again, in the
Best of
tech
both
space,
worlds.
it is the best of both worlds. But how many firms have in the tech space have really been able to do that? Can I count them on two hands? But I probably can. But getting to three hands, perhaps not, right? The most firms aren't in the Salesforce world, right? I mean, most firms are in the Microsoft world. So, and those firms have managed to really monetize the value of their ecosystem. Don't misunderstand me. But for the bulge bracket of firms with not such massive ecosystems, I think it's going to be mainly quality over quantity.
Yeah, which sounds incredibly logical, right? If you just think about it. No, I love it. We always ask our guests to nominate the next guest on the podcast. Who do you think we should have next to have another enticing and interesting conversation like the one we just had?
Yeah, well, I've mentioned a couple of people on this podcast. Jen Twombly of the Rhythm of Business is probably one of them. She understands ecosystems like no other. She will have a similar parallel to the life science space and the life science technology space in particular. I think she's one. Jay McBain is a second one. He's always good fun on the channel space. I believe he's already been a guest on your show, if I remember correctly.
That could be.
If he hasn't, even if he has, invite him back. Those would be the two people I would suggest you talk to.
Fantastic. I'll definitely check with both of them because honestly, I like having different conversations on this platform. You mentioned that we moved away from tech ecosystems, but I still think we got to insights that can actually be applied directly to the workspace of the people listening. So I really appreciate that. To wrap this up, do you have any final insights, tips, or tricks that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe we've alluded to it a little bit already. Once in a while, wrap a wet towel around your head, take a big step back, and just say, look, if, famous economist assumption, if I had a blank sheet of paper, what would this look like? What are we looking to achieve with all the different programs that we have? Looking beyond the transactional numbers, what do I need to achieve in this business? I mean, again, the fewest folks will have the luxury to do that, but once in a while, just take a step back from all the investments that you've made, from all of what you have, and rethink it anew. What is my future? What is the next setup that's going to get me to the future? That's a scary thing to do. People often don't take the time to do that, but you will learn something about your business as well as about how your ecosystem needs to be constructed so that it can take you to the next level where you need to get your business at.
Yeah, I love it. That's how innovation arises, right? Not by doing the same thing over and over, but stepping back and seeing what you can do differently. I think that's a fantastic point to end on. Michael, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and taking the time to speak with me. And you, dear listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michelle.